in Perkofei Poslutes. The Nostor Experia Vachaltem Loseva. The land will give its fruit, and you'll eat to a saving point. Yishavtem Leventa Choleo, and you'll live in the land with security. Sharashi Silchaltem Losova. Even within your innards, there'll be brocha. Meaning, we find by the Lechem Aponim, the Mishnah tells us that as long as there was brocha and Lechem Aponim, even if the Kohen would receive a portion no bigger than a pull, but the size of a bean, he would eat, he'd be saved. He couldn't eat more than a bean. How's that possible? The answer is, it's a ness. So when Klal Yisrael, as long as Shimon HaTzadik was alive, he was the Kohen Gadol, they merited that bracha. The Lechem Aponim had bracha. And therefore, the less was the equivalent of more. But once Shimon HaTzadik passed away, Klal Yisrael were not on that level any longer. Therefore, it says, those who were modest, tsunua, they would remove themselves, and the gagaronim, the gluttons, they would fight over it. So what determines whether less is more or not more? Whether there's bracha, there's no bracha. If there's bracha, quantity means nothing. But you have to be zocher. Now, the whole concept, what's the difference between physical and spiritual? The physical realm is finite. What we call mugbal, it's finite. The spiritual realm is unlimited. It's unlimited. The whole concept of time and space limitation has no relevance to the spiritual realm. It's a Maral. The Maral explains in Divorce Hashem, when Moshe Rabbeinu came and he told Klal Yisrael that the Gula is going to take place, Pokod Yivkod, he had the code words of Pokod Yivkod. Klal Yisrael believed, it says Vayamino. So over there it says that after Moshe Rabbeinu proved that he was the Goel, it says Vayamino. The people believed. So the Medrash says the moment is Vayamin Ha'om, Miyad Posga Shibud. The Shibud, the bondage stopped immediately. The Egyptians no longer had the ability to raid in on the Klal Yisrael to be slaves. So Maral Prages, what does Vayamin Ha'om have to do with Posga Shibud? So he explains, what is a slave? A slave is a person where there's a master who fully controls that person. In activity, even his mindset. He dictates every aspect of that person's life. So there's no person who's more limited than a slave. When we talk about the concept of Gashmi, finite limitation, the slave is what is in a limited state. And that's the reason he explains the Shibud was 400 years. What does 400 represent? 400 represents that a person is circumscribed on all sides, and that's total limitation. That's the Shibud. That's the ultimate level of bondage. Now, what's Vayamei Ha'om? They believed. A human being is a person who is influenced. We're influenced by our environments. We're influenced by the perspectives of society, of humanity. What about if you buck the system? You function in a way where you're not influenced. Automatically, not being influenced means you're assuming a spiritual profile. Physicality is, it exists, doesn't exist any longer. Why? Due to the influences. Something comes into being, it exists, then it starts withering, it goes out of existence. It's due to the environment why it is or it's not. Spirituality, once it's in effect, it's forever. That's called eternity. To live a life of not being affected, that's a state of spirituality. When it says by Yamin they believed, until that moment, they were pagans. Their beliefs were, they're not leaving. Moshe comes and performs the Nisim, and he says the code word, Pokod Yivkod, the Yamin they believed. Believing despite the environment, despite being slaves, which should be totally overwhelmed and subsumed with the master and the society. They were not. What did they assume? They assumed the spiritual profile. Spiritual means you're not influenced. So once you assume that posture of not being influenced, the masters couldn't reign in, couldn't dominate them. Therefore, it says, Miyad Nifska Shibud. The bondage ceased immediately. The whole concept of quantity. Why do you need quantity? If you live within the physical realm, quantity is an issue. To be able to live, you need quantity. You're within this existence, within the body. The body is finite, and that finite context needs to be nourished. It needs quantity. The whole concept of amount, quantity, is a concept, a reality of physical. Spiritual, though, concept of time and space and amount has no relevance. If a person himself goes and he plants every 6 years, and the 7th year he ceases to plant. You have to have a level of what? Of bitochen, of trust in Hashem. Despite the world sees it differently. But if you trust Hashem, you do what he says. But how's it going to work out? How's it going to work out? That question is what? A question of physicality. But if you have a sufficient amount of emunah and bitochen, belief, the question is not a question. That means what the question everybody asks you don't ask. Automatically, that's assuming a spiritual profile. Therefore, ochel mat, ochel kimus baruch ve'en me'ov. You eat a small amount and it's blessed in your innards. The lechem aponim, the showbread, as long as Shimon HaTzadik was alive and he officiated for 40 years, there was bracha in the lechem aponim. Bracha means, although it's physical food, but if a kohen would eat no more than the volume of a pool of a being, it was sufficient. He was sated. But how's it possible? Because again, that since the context was spiritual has no relevance to what? To quantity or to space or time. As a result of that, it nourishes and satisfies. 1 second. If you're going to ask the question, there's a famous photo here. But if you're going to ask the question, what do we know? 7th year, hey, lo nizra lo nesa for those tuasenu. We haven't planted, we haven't gathered in the harvest, the wheat. I will command my brocha in the 6th year. The produce will be a 3-year yield in the 6th year. So take a look in the Sifar over here. V'achaltum l'sova, posik yutes, she'aperis robei hamozo. Here, the Paris will have great ability to sustain. Ki'inyin shoya bomer shoya masbik l'godul k'mo l'koto. We find, but the mon, everybody gathered in the same amount, whether it was a child, whether it was an adult, it sustained them, the same amount. Brought about the same level, they weren't supposed to leap it over, brought about the same level of satiation. Kabram zal, ochel kimo, Mizbarach b'meov. You would eat a minuscule amount in Mizbarach b'meov. V'yaspigu peres hashishis gam l'shviyas. So quantity speaking, you're eating the same amount, but that same amount will last you all those years. because you need less. And you're not going to be carry the disgrace of hunger, famine, that you're a depleted people. You're not going to have to go to the other lands to purchase, to import grain. This is the Siporno. If you question this, if you question whether Hashem will provide or not provide, and you will not have the faith that the small amount will be sufficient, qualitatively speaking. As a result of that, you will be sated because the eye will see the tiru shiaspek hakamus. Then you realize that the kamus, the quantity, the quantitative amount will be sufficient. So what do we see? If you're on that level, special level, the spiritual level, that you have faith, then less is more. Quantity means nothing. But if you ask the question, which the world asks, how are you going to make ends meet? If that's a question, that means you're living within the world as a natural person. You're relying on the physicality of the world, nature. Then Hashem says, I will give my bracha, and the bracha will bring about the same result. Okay, that's the concept. It's very interesting. Moshe Rabbeinu forewarns Klal Yisrael that when they come into Israel, each person has his vineyard, he has his piece of land, and he has his field, and we succeed, and we have flocks and herds. What is a person prone to say? My power and my ability brought about all this wealth. When you say that, it's a problem. If you believe it's you and not Hashem, what is Hashem? Hashem withdraws. Kochiv Yotzi Yodi means that's what the world says. How do you succeed? You have to do self-made man. The moment you say that, that means you're tuning in and you're playing in and you're identifying as a total physical human being. A Jew believes one's financial stipend is set on Rosh Hashanah for the year. We have to take initiative. But why do we succeed to the degree that we succeed and have what we have? Because Hashem made that determination. You always have to have that linkage. If you have that linkage, then you receive what he deemed you should receive. But if you believe it's Kochim Yosim Yodi, you're the one, that means you're a total physical person. Klal not being a physical people, being a spiritual people, it doesn't add up. The Goyim, the nations of the world, that the world was given to them, it's the quantitative aspect of the world is theirs. The world was not given to Klal Yisrael, the physical world. The world was only given to us as a means, not as an end. The famous medrash I once quoted, Yaakov Avinu, after he sends the gift to Esav, and they meet, and he says to Esav says to him, what is this all about? He says, it's a gift to find favor in your eyes. So Esav says, I thought we had an agreement that the world to come is yours and the physical world is mine. So how do you have all this wealth? This was only a small percentage of Yaakov's wealth. You have all this wealth. So Yaakov explains to Esav that the world, where it's an end unto itself, that's yours, that's not ours. But the world as a means to an end, that its value is only spirituality, to facilitate spirituality, to do the will of Hashem, that part of the world was given to us. So this that I have now is not for the sake of itself. It's for the ultimate purpose to achieve the end, which is spirituality. If that's the case, if that is the emphasis, so what is the value of the physical? The value of the physical is the unlimited. And as a result of that, you can have less, and the less is equivalent of more. But if the value of the physical is the physical, what is physical? Physical is finite. Finite, as a result of that, you have to have a 3-year yield. If you don't have the 3-year yield, you don't make it. Because you're living as a physical person, as a being, that your perspective is the same as the perspective of the world, which was physical. So Koshmi of Simyodi, that is such a undermining perspective, because the moment you say it's me, that means me, it's my physicality. As a result of that, it takes you down. The Mishnah tells us that a person who's lomi term tochat, you study Torah despite the fact is that you're impoverished. So from limbo b'toch ultimately you can learn it b'toch osher. If you bevatel Torah b'toch osher, if you bevatel Torah despite you having so much, you can end up learning Torah b'toch. What is it all about? If a person studies Torah, regardless of how little he has, so what does that mean? My purpose is not, you say, I study if I have. If Hashem provides, don't provide, I don't study. We're not speaking about this koch nefesh, where the person's going to starve. You have, but you're living with making difficult making ends meet. So what does that mean? That means what is the statement? What is the declaration? Declaration is it's the spirituality, it's the Torah. So if that's the case, it's the Torah. You've proven that who are you? You're that spiritual person. Therefore, Hashem provides the material. Because now the material is purely for what? As an end. It's as a means, not an end. But a person who is given wealth and he's mevatel Torah, mitoch osher. What does that mean? That means your life is not, primary is not Torah. Primary is the physical. So Hashem says, to prove to you that you're not a physical people, you're not going to have. So you're going to be impoverished. So Ramban, at the beginning of Parshas Bamidbar, where over there he explains the chet of David HaMelech when he counted Klal Yisrael. Jews, when we're counted, you have to use the Machzah Shekel. And if you count and you don't, there's Magev, there's a plague. And David, he counted Klal Yisrael and there was a plague. And Yoav told him, you're doing the wrong thing. So the Ramban asked him, David didn't know something that a child that goes to elementary school knows, that he's supposed to give the Machzah Shekel. That's how you count him. Of course, David counted them with Machzah Shekel. With a medium, he didn't count them directly. So why was there a plague? So he explains that HaKadosh Baruch Hu said to Avram Avinu, Lo Yisofim Mirov, that you're not going to be able to calculate the number because of their how numerous they are. And because David wanted to know how many people he had, how many Jews were under his reign. That's why it happened. Because normally you count from the age of 20 and above. He counted from the age of Bar Mitzvah. That's one. Or he says, no, even when you count through a medium, that's only for a purpose. If you're going to Mulchama, if you're going to war, we say, we don't rely on a miracle. Therefore, we have to take initiative. We have to know how many standing. But of course, even with the medium, it has to be for a purpose. But if it's to know the number, that's the Yisuf Rov. They will not be, you're not permitted to count because of how numerous they are. So the obvious question is, but if you could count them, you come to a finite number. So you see, you can't count it. You could calculate the number. So what's the Yisuf Rov? So the way we once explained was this way. What is the value of Klal Yisrael? Is it our quantitative number, or it's who we are that we're the Am Hashem? Avram Avinu single-handedly, together with Eliezer, they defeated the 4 kings, the mightiest kings. Is that a quantitative number, or no? There's no quantitative there. How? The answer is because if you represent that Kodesh Baruch Hu, number means nothing. And that's what we read in the Torah in this week's parsha. Echad Yirdof Elef. One person will chase 1,000. If you go b'chukusai teilechu, you'll chase the enemy. Numbers mean nothing. But if you don't go on my chukos, you value the material and the emphasis material, one will chase 1,000 and 100 will chase 10,000. But how's it possible? The answer is because if you value number, I'll show the Jew number means nothing. And if you don't value the number, that's when you're going to have quantity. Then you're going to have abundance. That's the way it works. And that's what we're talking about over here. If you have the bitochen, as the Siforno says, the less is the equivalent of the more. But if you say, you ask the question, how are we going to work it out? There's a famous story I once told over Rav Shach, there was a kollel person in Bnei Brak, had a large family, and he had difficulty making ends meet. So he took a job in a bakery, and he worked in the bakery like from 2 a.m. till 6 a.m. to earn some extra income, although he slept less. It didn't impinge on his learning, but on his sleep. And he goes to Rav Shach. After he was earning more, he had greater difficulty. Before he made ends meet, after he started to make this extra money, then he couldn't make ends meet. So he went to Rav Shach. He says, I don't understand. When I wasn't working, somehow it always worked out. Now that I went and I worked these extra hours and have some extra income, doesn't work. He's one. He says, stop working, go do what you have to do. It'll work out. Meaning, if once you feel that it's you're the one who's making the difference, then Hashem says, you're not the one making the difference. It doesn't make a difference. When you rely on him and you do, and of course, it's not a person says, my cupboard is empty and I'm going to learn and I'm not going to feed my family. I mean, that's foolishness. But if you take a responsible ishtadlus, a responsible initiative, because we're physical, and kemach and Torah, that's a fact. And kemach and Torah, you have to have physical. But the question is, how much material do you need? You need enough. But how? How's it going to work out? How could it work out? Because once you assume that connection or that perspective, which is a spiritual perspective, you're not subject to the physicality of the world. And that's exactly what we're talking about over here.
All right, we do